When you accept the avoidant person's rejection, truly accept it, not as manipulation tactic or as strategy to make them want you, but as genuine recognition that they cannot give you what you need, and that continuing to pursue relationship with them is futile and self-destructive. Something paradoxical and psychologically fascinating occurs. They want you more intensely than they wanted you when you were available and pursuing them. They panic about losing you in ways they never panicked when you were trying to hold on. They suddenly recognize your value with clarity that was impossible when you were demonstrating that value through your consistent presence and effort. This counterintuitive response, where your acceptance of rejection increases their desire rather than allowing them the relief they claim to need, reveals fundamental truth about avoidant psychology. Their desire is triggered by unavailability and scarcity, rather than by availability and pursuit. Their attachment system activates when they face loss, rather than when they have secure access. Their recognition of value comes through absence rather than through presence. Their capacity to want intensely emerges only when what they want is no longer accessible to them. The avoidant spent the relationship unable to fully appreciate you, unable to recognize your worth clearly, unable to desire you with intensity because you were there, available, trying, present, offering yourself to them in ways that their defensive system interpreted as pressure, as obligation, as threat to their independence, rather than as gift to be valued. But your acceptance of their rejection changes everything. You're no longer available, no longer pursuing, no longer trying to make the relationship work, no longer offering yourself as option they can take or leave according to their comfort level. This unavailability, this genuine acceptance that allows you to release them completely, this shift from being person pursuing them to being person who has moved on from them, triggers their attachment anxiety in ways your pursuit never could, activates their fear of loss in ways your availability prevented, makes them recognize your value through your absence in ways your presence never accomplished. Your acceptance eliminates the pressure and obligation they felt when you wanted them, replacing it with scarcity and loss that makes them want you desperately, with mystery about your current state, and your feelings that makes them obsessed with knowing what you're thinking, with fear that they've lost you permanently, that makes them panic about undoing the rejection they initiated, with recognition that you were an exceptional partner they took for granted that makes them desperate to restore what they destroyed through their patterns and their inability to receive what you offered when it was freely given. Why your acceptance of their rejection triggers intense desire rather than relief. The avoidant person's response to your genuine acceptance of their rejection is paradoxically intense desire rather than the relief they claim to need. Understanding why acceptance triggers wanting reveals the psychological mechanisms that govern avoidant desire and attachment. Your acceptance triggers desire because it removes the pressure and obligation that were suppressing their natural desire while you were pursuing. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant experienced your desire for them, your pursuit of them, your wanting to be with them as pressure. Pressure to reciprocate feelings they couldn't access. Pressure to meet needs they couldn't meet. Pressure to commit in ways they weren't capable of committing. This pressure activated their defensive system and suppressed their natural desire, because desire means wanting something that creates vulnerability, and they couldn't allow themselves to want what was creating pressure and obligation. But your acceptance eliminates the pressure completely. You're not wanting them anymore. You're not expecting anything from them. You're not pursuing or pressuring. This elimination of pressure allows their natural desire to emerge, because wanting you no longer means accepting pressure or obligation. You're not available to want anything from them, so their desire can exist without triggering their defenses against being obligated. Your acceptance triggers desire because scarcity and unavailability activate their attachment system in ways availability never could. The avoidance attachment system is paradoxically organized to activate in response to unavailability rather than to availability. When you were available, when you were there and wanting them, their attachment system remained deactivated because secure availability doesn't trigger anxious attachment. But your acceptance of rejection creates unavailability. You're no longer accessible option, no longer available for them to return to if they change their mind, no longer there waiting for them. This unavailability activates their attachment anxiety, triggers their fear of abandonment, makes their system panic about loss in ways that activate intense desire to restore what they're losing. The desire emerges precisely because you're no longer available, because scarcity triggers wanting in ways abundance never does for their wounded attachment system. Your acceptance triggers desire because it reverses the pursuer-distancer dynamic that was making you less attractive through your pursuit. Throughout the relationship, you were pursuing and they were distancing, and this dynamic made you less attractive to them because pursuit triggers avoidant withdrawal, while distance triggers avoidant pursuit. The pursuer-distancer dynamic is self-reinforcing. The more you pursued, the more they wanted distance. The more distance they created, the more you pursued. But your acceptance reverses this dynamic completely. You're no longer pursuing, you're distancing. They're no longer the one creating distance. They're the one facing your distance. This reversal makes you more attractive because now you're in the distancer role that triggers their pursuit response rather than in the pursuer role that triggered their withdrawal response. Your acceptance triggers desire because loss aversion makes potential permanent loss more salient than the complications of having you were salient. While you were present, the avoidant focused on the complications and discomforts of having you, the intimacy anxiety, the pressure, the expectations, the vulnerability relationship required. These negatives were salient and motivated their rejection or their distancing. But your acceptance shifts what's salient from the complications of having you to the loss of losing you permanently. Loss aversion means humans feel losses more intensely than equivalent gains, and the avoidance system is now focused on the loss rather than on the complications. The pain of losing you permanently feels more acute than the discomfort of being with you felt, making them want desperately to prevent the loss in ways they never wanted to maintain the relationship when focus was on its complications rather than on its potential permanent loss. Your acceptance triggers desire because it proves you're stronger and more self-respecting than they believed, making you more attractive through demonstrated strength. The avoidant likely underestimated you throughout the relationship, saw your patience as weakness, your pursuit as desperation, your staying as inability to leave. This underestimation made you less attractive because the avoidant, despite their wounds, is attracted to strength and repelled by perceived weakness. But your acceptance proves you're strong enough to accept rejection, strong enough to walk away, strong enough to choose yourself over a relationship with them. This demonstrated strength makes you dramatically more attractive because it proves you're not the weak, desperate person they thought, but a strong, self-respecting person capable of hard choices. Strength is attractive even to wounded people, and your acceptance demonstrates strength they didn't realize you possessed. Your acceptance triggers desire because it creates mystery and unknown where there was certainty and known, and the unknown is more compelling than the known. When you were available and pursuing, you were known quantity. The avoidant knew you wanted them, knew you'd accept them back, knew generally what you were thinking and feeling. This knownness felt safe, but wasn't compelling. But your acceptance creates mystery. They don't know what you're thinking now. They don't know if you've moved on completely or if part of you still cares. They don't know if reconciliation is possible or if you're closed to it. They don't know if you're suffering or thriving. This mystery is compelling in ways the known never was. Their mind obsesses over the unknowns, tries to solve the mystery, becomes preoccupied with figuring out what you're thinking and feeling when they can no longer access this information through your communication and your presence. Your acceptance triggers desire because it makes them the one who might lose something rather than the one who chose to create distance, reversing the power dynamic. When they rejected you or created distance, they were in position of power. They were choosing. They were controlling the distance. They were the one who could decide whether relationship continued. This power position didn't create desire because having power and control meant they weren't in vulnerable position of wanting something they might not have. But your acceptance reverses this. Now, they're the one who might lose. Now, they're the one who wants something, you, that they might not be able to have. Now, they're in vulnerable position of wanting rather than in powerful position of choosing. This vulnerability and this potential loss create desire in ways power and control never do. They want intensely what they might lose permanently, while they couldn't want intensely what they controlled and had access to. Your acceptance triggers desire because it forces them to confront what life without you actually feels like versus the fantasy of freedom they imagined. When they were in relationship with you, or when they were creating distance, they fantasized about life without you, imagining they'd feel relieved, free, unburdened by relationship obligations. But your acceptance allows them to experience reality of life without you, rather than fantasy, and reality proves far worse than fantasy. They're not relieved, they're lonely. They're not free, they're isolated. They're not unburdened, they're missing what you provided. This confrontation with reality versus fantasy makes them want you desperately, because reality of life without you is unbearable in ways they didn't predict, making them desire to restore what they lost, because the fantasy of freedom proved false when tested against actual experience of your absence. The psychological mechanisms that make your acceptance irresistible to them. The avoidant person's intense desire triggered by your acceptance operates through specific psychological mechanisms that make you dramatically more attractive and more compelling than you were when you were available and pursuing them. Understanding these mechanisms reveals why acceptance creates attraction in ways pursuit never could. Your acceptance activates Phantom X mechanism, where you become idealized version in their memory rather than complex reality in their present. When you're present, the avoidant must engage with real you, with your needs, your expectations, your complex humanity that includes both positives and imperfections. Real you creates real relationship demands that trigger their defenses, but your acceptance and your resulting absence allows Phantom X mechanism to activate. You become idealized in their memory. They remember the best moments, the positive qualities, the good parts of relationship without the complicating reality of your actual presence. This idealized version is irresistible because it's perfect construction without the complexities that real relationship entailed. They're attracted to phantom you rather than real you, but they don't recognize this distinction and experience the attraction as intense desire for you specifically. Your acceptance activates psychological reactance where they want precisely what they cannot have, because being denied access feels like loss of freedom. Psychological reactance is mechanism where people desire more intensely things they're told they cannot have, where restriction of freedom increases desire for the restricted thing. When you were available and accepting of them, they had freedom to be with you, or not as they chose. This freedom meant their choice to create distance didn't feel like loss of freedom, but felt like exercise of freedom. But your acceptance removes this freedom. They cannot have you now, even if they want you, because you've removed yourself as option. This restriction of their freedom to choose you creates reactance that makes them want you intensely, specifically because they cannot have you, specifically because the option has been removed, specifically because their freedom to choose you has been restricted by your choice to not be available. Your acceptance activates Zeigarnik effect, where unfinished business creates more mental preoccupation than completed interactions. When you are actively engaged with them, pursuing, discussing the relationship, expressing your feelings, the interaction was ongoing, but was completing itself through these exchanges. But your acceptance creates sense of unfinished business. The relationship ended without full resolution, without complete closure, without all feelings being expressed or all questions being answered. This unfinished quality creates powerful Zeigarnik effect, where their mind cannot stop thinking about you, cannot stop processing the unfinished relationship, becomes preoccupied with you in ways that completed interaction would never create. This mental preoccupation that comes from unfinished business makes you irresistible because they cannot stop thinking about you, cannot close the mental file on you, cannot achieve the psychological closure that would allow them to move on. Your acceptance activates comparison mechanism, where everyone they encounter is measured against you and found lacking. The avoidant tries to move forward, tries to date others, tries to find what they had with you elsewhere. But your acceptance and absence means you're now comparison point for all other potential partners, and the comparison consistently favors you. Others don't understand them like you did. Others don't create the same depth. Others don't have your patience or your specific qualities. These constant unfavorable comparisons make you irresistible by default, because everyone else is inadequate compared to you, making them realize through comparison that you were exceptional in ways they didn't appreciate while you were available. The comparison mechanism means that attempting to replace you actually increases desire for you by proving you're irreplaceable. Your acceptance activates cognitive dissonance, where their rejection of you conflicts with growing recognition of your value, creating psychological discomfort they try to resolve by wanting you back. The avoidant rejected you, or created distance based on belief that this was right choice, that you weren't right fit, that they'd be better off. But your acceptance and the resulting consequences create evidence that contradicts this belief. They're not better off. You were valuable. Rejecting you was mistake. This creates cognitive dissonance between their action, rejecting you, and their growing recognition. You were valuable and they made mistake. Cognitive dissonance is psychologically uncomfortable, and people are motivated to resolve it. One resolution path is changing their evaluation of you, deciding you weren't valuable after all. But the evidence contradicts this. The more available resolution is to want you back, to undo the rejection, to restore what they now recognize was valuable. This motivation to resolve dissonance through wanting you back makes you irresistible. Your acceptance activates scarcity principle, where limited availability increases perceived value beyond value, perceived when freely available. Throughout behavioral economics and psychology, scarcity increases perceived value. Limited edition items are more desirable than unlimited items. Experiences that are rare are valued more than common experiences. When you were freely available, when they had unlimited access to you through your pursuit and presence, your value was perceived through abundance lens. You were there, you were available, you were freely accessible. But your acceptance creates scarcity. You're no longer available. Access to you is no longer possible. You've become rare rather than abundant. This scarcity increases your perceived value dramatically. They value you more highly as scarce, unavailable resource, then they valued you as abundantly available resource, making you irresistible through scarcity principle. Your acceptance activates fear of missing out mechanism, where witnessing or imagining you moving forward without them creates panic about missing opportunity. The avoidant sees evidence through social media or mutual friends, or imagines that you're moving forward with your life, dating others, being happy, building new life without them in it. This creates intense FOMO, where they panic about missing opportunity to be with you, about losing chance that won't come again, about you finding someone else who will appreciate you in ways they failed to appreciate you. This FOMO makes you irresistible because it's driven by fear of permanent loss of opportunity, by panic about being replaced, by terror that they'll spend rest of their life knowing they had chance with someone exceptional and lost it through their own patterns. Your acceptance activates intermittent reinforcement mechanism, where the uncertain possibility of future connection is more compelling than certain rejection or certain acceptance. When you were pursuing them, the pattern was consistent. You wanted them, you were available, you were accepting. This consistency, while positive, didn't create compelling intermittent reinforcement, but your acceptance creates uncertainty. Maybe reconciliation is possible in future, maybe it's not. Maybe you still care, maybe you don't. Maybe you'd consider trying again. Maybe you've moved on completely. This uncertainty creates intermittent reinforcement pattern where the possibility of positive outcome, you being available again, is uncertain, and uncertain intermittent reinforcement is more compelling and more addiction creating than certain outcomes. They become compelled by the uncertain possibility in ways certain availability never compelled them. How your acceptance destroys their defensive narratives and creates panic. The avoidant person's defensive narratives that justified their rejection or distancing are systematically destroyed by your acceptance, creating panic as their psychological justifications collapse and they're forced to confront realities they were avoiding through their defenses. Understanding how acceptance destroys defenses reveals why they panic rather than feeling the relief they expected. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that you were too needy or too dependent by proving through your self-sufficient acceptance that neediness wasn't the problem. The avoidant likely framed you as too needy, too dependent, wanting too much from them, and this narrative justified their distance and their rejection. The narrative said, "You need me too much, so I need space." But your acceptance proves this narrative false. You're not too needy. You accepted rejection and moved forward with your life. You're not too dependent. You're clearly fine without them. You're not wanting too much. You've stopped wanting anything from them at all. This destruction of the neediness narrative creates panic because it eliminates their justification for rejection and forces recognition that neediness wasn't actually the problem, but was defensive projection they used to justify their patterns. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that the relationship wasn't right, or that you were incompatible by making them recognize the problem was their capacity, not the fit. The avoidant framed the relationship issues as incompatibility. You weren't right for each other. The relationship had fundamental problems. It wasn't meant to work. This narrative protected them from recognizing their patterns were the problem. But your acceptance forces different recognition. You accepted the rejection and moved on, proving you're capable of recognizing when something isn't working and acting accordingly. This maturity and clarity makes it harder to maintain the incompatibility narrative. If you were truly incompatible, why do they want you so desperately now? Why does everyone else fall short in comparison? The collapse of incompatibility narrative forces recognition that compatibility existed but their capacity to sustain relationship didn't. creating panic about having destroyed good relationship through their limitations rather than having ended relationship that was fundamentally flawed. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that they'd be better off without you by providing experiential evidence that they're dramatically worse off. The avoidant told themselves they'd be relieved without you, would feel freer without relationship obligations, would be happier in their independence. This narrative justified creating distance or accepting the ending. But your acceptance allows them to experience reality of being without you, and reality contradicts narrative. They're not better off. They're miserable. They're not relieved. They're consumed with thoughts of you. They're not happier. They're recognizing they were happier with you, despite the complications. This experiential destruction of their better off without you narrative creates panic because it proves their judgment was wrong. Their instincts misled them. Their defensive reasoning led them to destroy something that was actually serving their well-being, despite their inability to recognize this while it was happening. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that you'd always be available if they change their mind by proving you have boundaries and self-respect they underestimated. The avoidant likely maintained unconscious narrative that you'd always be there, that if they eventually wanted to try again, you'd be available. That rejection wasn't permanent because you cared enough that you'd accept them back whenever they were ready. This narrative provided safety net that made rejection feel lower stakes. But your acceptance destroys this narrative by proving you're not waiting. You're not available for them to return to when convenient. You have boundaries that their rejection cross permanently. This destruction of the safety net narrative creates panic because it means rejection has permanent consequences they didn't anticipate, means they cannot control the outcome by deciding when they're ready to try again, means they've lost you in ways that cannot be undone simply by changing their mind. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that they don't need anyone by forcing confrontation with how much they needed specifically you. The avoidance core defensive narrative is that they don't need anyone, that they're self-sufficient, that connection is optional rather than necessary. This narrative protects them from acknowledging need that feels vulnerable, but your acceptance and the resulting suffering forces. Recognition that they do need. Specifically, they needed you. Specifically, your absence is devastating. Specifically, life without you is unbearable in ways that prove need existed despite their denial. This destruction of their self-sufficiency narrative creates panic because it challenges their entire self-understanding, proves their core defensive belief is false, forces acknowledgement of need and dependence they've spent their life denying. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that their patterns are protective by proving their patterns destroyed exactly what they needed protection to preserve. The avoidant justified their patterns as self-protective. Withdrawal protects against rejection. Distance protects against abandonment. Emotional unavailability protects against being hurt. These narratives framed patterns as successful defenses. But your acceptance provides evidence of catastrophic defense failure. Their patterns didn't protect them. Their patterns destroyed relationship with you. Their withdrawal didn't prevent rejection. It caused the rejection they feared by making relationship with them untenable. Their distance didn't prevent abandonment. It created abandonment by driving you away. This evidence that their patterns are counterproductive rather than protective destroys the narrative that justified those patterns and creates panic about having destroyed their well-being through the very mechanisms they believed were protecting it. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that you didn't really understand them or see their value by demonstrating through your acceptance that you saw clearly and chose to leave anyway. The avoidance sometimes protects themselves by believing people who leave didn't really understand them, didn't see their positive qualities, couldn't handle their complexity. but your acceptance proves you understood them completely. You saw their patterns clearly, recognized them as defenses, understood where they came from, and you still chose to accept the rejection and leave. You didn't leave out of ignorance, but out of understanding. You didn't leave because you couldn't see their value, but because you recognized their patterns made sustaining relationship impossible despite their value. This destruction of the "they didn't understand me" narrative creates panic because it means someone who truly saw them chose to leave anyway, proving the problem was serious enough that even understanding didn't create basis for staying. Your acceptance destroys their narrative that they were in control of the relationship dynamic by proving you had more power than they realized through your ability to simply leave. The avoidant maintained sense of control throughout the relationship. They controlled distance. They decided when to engage. They had power to determine whether relationship continued. This narrative of control felt safe. But your acceptance destroys this narrative by proving they never had the control they thought they had. You had ultimate power all along. Power to leave, power to accept rejection, power to remove yourself completely. And you exercised this power in ways that proved they weren't controlling the dynamic, but were operating within dynamic you could end at any moment. This destruction of their control narrative creates panic because control has been their primary mechanism for managing anxiety and feeling safe. And recognizing they didn't have control means recognizing they were vulnerable all along in ways their false sense of control prevented them from acknowledging. What their increased desire after your acceptance means for your boundaries and healing. The avoidant person's intense desire triggered by your acceptance of rejection has specific implications for your boundaries, your healing, and your path forward. Understanding what their increased desire means helps you respond to it in ways that serve your well-being rather than their needs or their patterns. Their increased desire means your boundaries are working exactly as intended and should be maintained regardless of their pursuit. The fact that accepting rejection and maintaining boundaries created their intense desire proves boundaries are effective. They're creating consequences. They're demonstrating your self-respect. They're communicating your worth in ways pursuing never did. This effectiveness validates maintaining boundaries rather than softening them in response to their desire. If you soften boundaries now in response to their pursuit, you'd be teaching them that the pattern works. They can reject you or distance, then pursue when you've created space, and you'll be available again. Maintaining boundaries, despite their increased desire, teaches different lesson. Rejecting you has permanent consequences. Your acceptance of rejection was genuine, not strategic. Their desire doesn't create obligation for you to be available again. Their increased desire means the increase is driven by scarcity and loss rather than by developed capacity to sustain relationship, making it dangerous to respond to. The mechanisms creating their desire, scarcity, unavailability, fear of loss, don't indicate they've developed capacity to be in relationship with you. They want you because you're unavailable, because they're afraid of losing you, because others don't compare to idealized version of you in their memory. But these are not indicators of capacity for sustained intimacy, ability to handle vulnerability, developed distress tolerance, or addressed attachment wounds. If you responded to their desire, if you became available again, the scarcity would be removed, and with it much of their desire, the fear of loss would be eliminated, and with it, their motivation. The reality of you would replace idealized memory and trigger their patterns again. The increased desire is dangerous precisely because it's not based on genuine capacity development. Their increased desire means any reconciliation without sustained therapeutic work would repeat the same patterns that necessitated your acceptance of rejection. The avoidant wants you intensely right now, but this wanting is crisis response to loss, not indication of transformation. They're feeling their pattern's consequences and want to escape those consequences by getting you back. But getting you back without having done deep work on their attachment wounds, without having developed distress tolerance through therapy, without having practiced new relational patterns over significant time, would simply restart the same cycle. They'd feel relief from loss once you were back. Their desire would decrease as scarcity was eliminated. Their patterns would reassert as intimacy intensified. And you'd find yourself back in same painful dynamic that led to rejection in first place. Their increased desire doesn't predict different outcome without sustained, demonstrated capacity building. Their increased desire means responding to it would teach both of you harmful lessons about consequences and about what behaviors get rewarded. If the avoidant can reject you or create painful distance, then pursue you when you've accepted rejection and created boundaries, and have you respond positively to their pursuit. Several harmful lessons are taught. They learn their patterns don't have permanent consequences, that rejection can be undone through later pursuit, that your boundaries aren't actually firm, that they can treat you poorly, and restore connection when convenient for them. You learn that your boundaries can be violated by sufficient pursuit, that accepting rejection doesn't actually mean accepting rejection if they come back, that your self-respect is conditional rather than firm, that you're available to people whose patterns hurt you if they pursue sufficiently after you've created space. These lessons damage both people and create groundwork for continued dysfunction. Their increased desire means you should use their pursuit as validation of your worth while maintaining boundaries that protect you from re-engaging prematurely. The increased desire is information. It confirms you are valuable, confirms they recognize what they lost, confirms your absence affects them profoundly. Use this information to validate your worth, to strengthen your confidence, to remind yourself when you doubt that you did matter and were special to them, even when their behavior didn't communicate this. But validation of worth doesn't create obligation to respond or to make yourself available. You can know you are valuable while maintaining boundaries that protect you. You can feel validated by their desire while refusing to engage with it. The validation and the boundaries coexist. Their increased desire proves your worth, and their patterns prove why maintaining boundaries is necessary. Their increased desire means being extremely cautious about breadcrumbs or reach-outs designed to test your boundaries and to restore access to you. The avoidant experiencing intense desire will likely test your boundaries, sending messages, creating opportunities for contact, using mutual friends, finding ways to insert themselves into your awareness. These reach-outs are designed to break your acceptance of rejection, to restore some level of access to you, to test whether your boundaries are truly firm. Being cautious means not responding to breadcrumbs, not accepting minimal contact as sufficient change in their capacity, not allowing yourself to be pulled back into orbit through small concessions that seem harmless but are designed to gradually restore access. Every small boundary violation makes larger boundary violations easier. Maintaining absolute boundary around contact protects you from gradual erosion of boundaries through incremental testing. Their increased desire means if they're genuinely interested in reconciliation, they need to demonstrate sustained change over significant time before deserving consideration. If the avoidant wants you back, intense temporary desire is insufficient. They need to demonstrate sustained change, therapy for significant period, minimum 6 months to a year, demonstrated different behavior in multiple contexts, developed capacity for distress tolerance and emotional regulation, practiced vulnerability in lower stakes relationships, concrete evidence that they've addressed their attachment wounds through professional help, These demonstrations need to happen over time, long enough that initial crisis-motivated change has been tested and sustained. Only after sustained, demonstrated capacity building should reconciliation even be considered, and even then requires careful evaluation of whether their demonstrated changes are sufficient for relationship that would meet your needs rather than relationship where you're still accommodating their limitations. Their increased desire ultimately means you should continue your own healing and forward movement regardless of their desire, recognizing that their wanting you doesn't obligate your availability. The most important response to their increased desire is to let it exist without letting it affect your path. They can want you desperately while you continue moving forward with your life. Their desire is their experience to manage, their consequence to sit with, their potential motivation for genuine change if they choose to use it that way. Your responsibility is not to manage their desire or to reward it with your availability, but to continue your healing, to maintain your boundaries, to build life that serves you, to pursue relationships where you're valued consistently from the beginning, rather than after you've been rejected and have created space. They want you more because you accepted rejection. Let them want you while you move forward. Let their desire be their experience without making it your responsibility. Let their increased wanting prove your value while you direct that value toward relationships where it's recognized from the start, where it doesn't require rejection and acceptance to be seen, where your worth is honored through consistent presence rather than through desperate pursuit after you've accepted rejection and removed yourself from dynamic that wasn't serving you. Their increased desire changes nothing about your path forward. It only confirms you were right to accept rejection and proves that accepting rejection paradoxically makes you more attractive while simultaneously proving that their attraction is triggered by unhealthy dynamics rather than by genuine capacity for relationship you deserve.